Hey all, thanks for joining us. We're recording a team chat and a team audio podcast for the DAOfi team to talk about layer 2, the different pros and cons of layer 2 and the different Ethereum scaling solutions that exist today. It's a super commonly asked question from the community. So it's helpful for us to talk about it because this is what we talk about in our daily meetings. So it's helpful for us to just chat about it, collect our thoughts, and might as well make it transparent for everyone so everyone can learn something from this process. We're going to start with intros across the board. I'm Andrew, creator of Karma DAO and founder of DAOfi. Working on DAOfi is my full-time thing. And we could just go down the list and take it from there.
Cool. James Young, tech lead, mainly overseeing implementation and product on a technical side when it comes to DAOfi.
Yeah, I'm Alex Lewis. I'm a smart contract developer for DAOfi.
And I'm Nathan, applied cryptography. I've been working with layer 2 scalability for a while now.
For sure. James, do you want to spearhead the discussion?
Sure. Okay. So, this is a bit open-ended, and we can start to set context by kind of definitions. So layer 1, Ethereum mainnet, we're going to be talking about layer 2, but just a quick aside, there is, I guess some technical nuance that we can just dive into in terms of the difference between layer 2 and a side chain and what those differences are, just to set context. And I can briefly explain, and more than happy for anyone to kind of fill in as well as we go along here. Layer 2, from my understanding, and the way I think about it, is that layer 2, is rooted in the security of layer 1. So that's why it's like on top of or secondary to layer 1, which is like mainnet Ethereum is the assumption here. And then you have side chains like XDAI, for example, with its own security and consensus, and it is considered sometimes like a layer 2 solution, but it doesn't depend on layer 1 security at all on ETH. So just to kind of get that out of the way, the difference between layer 2 and a side chain, and it gets a little bit confusing because you have now these other kind of standalone blockchains that are sometimes considered a layer 2 to Ethereum, depending on how you pair. You have these like bridges. So on Near, for example, you have what they call the Rainbow Bridge. On Solana, you have what they call Wormhole, and you have these different connections. So those are technically other layer 1, or if depending on your perspective, can consider them side chains to Ethereum with these like bridges. And I guess the main difference when it comes to layer 2 is this general construction where you deposit into a contract on layer 1, and it's like this escrow. Funds are locked on layer 1, and then synthetics or equal representations are generated on layer 2. And in general, on layer 2, there are, I guess, payment channels / state channels. There are plasma, and then kind of what is in vogue right now, ZK rollups. And we can dive into each of those specific implementations, or talk about different sidechain constructions that bridge back to ETH as well. But I hope that gives a quick overall kind of synopsis. Nathan, Alex, I don't know if there's anything I missed or misspoke.
Yeah, just to be clear, this image, this circle of layer 2 scalability projects doesn't even incorporate all of the scaling efforts of cryptocurrency networks, which started a long time ago. I think the first ones were colored coins, and pegging state from root chains and spinning off secondary chains based off of that is it's an old idea. So in the efforts of keeping this timely, maybe we should focus on the scaling that DAOfi in particular is looking for and finds useful, or the particular requirements from DAOfi, and which scaling solutions we found suitable.
Yeah.
So maybe we should describe what DAOfi is, or is there a need to set the stage for that? Or is that generally going to be known that DAOfi is a
understood. A DEX, AMM DEX.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to clarify, I guess the whole point of all of this is really, mainly transaction fees and transaction throughput. Is why these solutions are needed. And yeah, kind of all the different approaches are in some effect trying to optimize either one of those.
Right. I think early in Bitcoin, we realized that scaling is going to be a challenge with append-only blockchain logs and replicated state across all of the nodes. These things, inherently lead to scaling problems and, bottlenecks on throughput through the blockchain. So yeah, people have been trying to tackle this for a long time. And when you look at something like DAOfi, which, as Andrew mentioned, is an AMM, which is an exchange based off of automated market making, you're going to deal with more complicated state and complicated state transitions than a simple Bitcoin transaction. So that's going to eliminate a lot of our possible options, even a lot off of this list. So you might want to look at something like state channels. I believe those were beyond like colored coins or the original sidechain ideas. I think we started to look at state channels in the Lightning Network shortly after that. These solutions might be good for simple value transfer. They have their own trade-offs, but I don't think we need to talk about state channels because it might be pretty evident that that kind of a solution is not going to work for a project that is more complex than simple value transfer. It requires the ability to create pools and withdraw from pools and to swap and balance pools. So there's mathematics and logic required to execute these state transitions.
It might be worth mentioning that there's issues, the challenges around settling back on chain when eventually, you want to leave a state channel. Some of the work we were doing at SpankChain, highlighted those issues where it's easy enough for participants to enter into a state channel and then transfer with each other off chain, but to be entirely permissionless, handling those exit case resolutions requires like a timeout on chain, I believe, in the case of Perun, and those are kind of like suboptimal in that case.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's something I think it's good to bring up because I think that is the fundamental trade-off that all projects have to look at when they're dealing with how do you scale your application in a decentralized and trustless way, right? So that exit time is one of the features, you could say, although it's not necessarily a wanted user interface feature, but it is a side effect of the way that you handle consensus inside of a state channel. And this side effect made its way through Plasma as well. And Plasma is in the category of solutions that we would want to look at. Plasma could potentially do more advanced state transitions. But they fall into the same exit category that Lex just mentioned about state channels. They would be the kind of wait time of 1 week when you want to move from the layer 2 to the layer 1 state. This is generally not great. This is kind of one of the downsides of using a system like state channels or optimistic rollup. And of course, this wait time is used for something called fraud proofs, where if you're talking about layer 2, you can kind of categorize it in 2 different ways, right? You can categorize it by how the security is handled from moving state from the layer 2 to the layer 1 chain. You could do that with fraud proofs, or you could do that with a more advanced proof system like snarks. And this is even relevant for side chains, how you move state between the Ethereum chain and the XDAI chain is done with a very centralized validator system. And then you could have even proof of stake sitting between these 2 things. We've seen this in a few solutions. Matic would be one of those where they do have a proof of stake exchange between the layer 1 and the layer 2 chain. But they've also worked with fraud proofs and using Plasma to move state. And that would land itself in that category of 1 week wait times to move state from layer 2 to layer 1. And that is due to the security properties of how Plasma was designed, which was sort of similarly designed. It was designed similarly to the Lightning Network. One of the co-founders of the Lightning Network helped build Plasma.
And then, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
I think that was a great overview. I think that for the sake of talking about layer 2 and the trade-offs, and maybe we can talk about it and categorize it between some general constructions like payment/state channels and Plasma, and then CK rollups. There are the trade-offs, and you have this 1 week kind of exit time. In the payment/state channels, you have this concept of watchtowers, and I think in all the constructions you have issues, if we can talk about kind of liveness requirements and the trade-offs there, and also when it comes to data availability.
Liveness is usually less of an issue. Liveness, I think, roots back to the layer 1 chain. So, well, of course, there will be issues if the layer 1 chain is congested. However, we'll throw that under the rug for the moment. If layer 1 is congested or is experiencing failures, then of course all layer 2 systems are going to be vulnerable for that. However, data availability, as you mentioned, that one is the interesting one. That's very important. And we should also probably briefly mention that in the constructs like a payment channel or a Plasma exit, that they have also thought of ways to purchase those exits or create a network of buyers or marketplace that is capable of purchasing exits and facilitating quick exits by doing that.
Can you take a step back real quick and explain that a little bit?
Right. So if you have state on a layer 2 chain and you want to go to the layer 1 chain, you can put in your exit and wait the 1 week for the security properties to expire, so that way your state is trusted. Or you could go to a marketplace and say, I have proof that this is a valid transaction, which you should have in any good Plasma network. And then you can ask somebody with liquidity to trade with you on the layer 2 network and do the exit on your behalf. So they will be waiting the week for you. You'd probably pay a premium for this, for the capital loss for locking it up for that kind of time. So that's a possibility, but it's friction. It's more moving parts. I don't think any networks like that are fully flushed out or operational at this current time. But there are.
So it's kind of like a fully collateralized loan, if you will.
Right. Yeah. In a sense, it's like a service. So it does require some entity to have the liquidity to facilitate these purchases of exits, but it is trustless. The purchaser knows that the transaction is valid as long as the operator is in a good state. So it just really requires liquidity. And this has been an idea for, I think, about 1.5 years or so. I don't know if it's come to fruition yet. I think the layer 2 networks themselves are still just kind of popping up. And then there's also been, a shift between which applications were being built based off of which core ideas and design philosophies. As we mentioned, there's two different types of proofs for how you move from layer 1 to layer 2. There's fraud proofs and ZK snarks. And how you handle data is the other kind of category in layer 2 systems. Do you keep the data on chain or do you keep the data off chain? A system like Plasma will keep the data off chain. Now this is important. This changes a lot of the design of the security, and it actually leads to why you have to have that 1 week wait period. And it also leads to attack vectors that are currently unsolved. In any Plasma design, you will end up with any Plasma design using fraud proofs. We have to be specific there, right? So if they have off-chain data, they're not checkpointing the data on-chain, they're only checkpointing the Merkle root of the whole data system. And they are using fraud proofs to maintain that system. There is an economic attack where we aren't sure how to solve that. So those systems maybe don't look as promising to everybody right now. And it does seem more promising at the current time to use snark systems. Of course, that comes with a trade-off as well. The transaction throughput is not as good with a purely snark-based verification as opposed to fraud-proof verification. So there's trade-offs for everything. If you want a quicker exit, you would want to use a snark-based system. If you want higher throughput and less security guarantee in a sense, and you're willing to deal with the 1 week wait times or the marketplace of purchasing state, then a Plasma system might look good.
I think that's why Connects, through what they're calling Vector, I think that's the brand name now, with Matic or Polygon, I think that's what they're calling it now, uses this concept of a channel connected to Plasma for these fast exits. But I do think it requires some capital provider to front. And I don't know if or how formal they have this marketplace or how the marketplace incentives work. But I do think that's the only, at least from my understanding, the only implementation of a channel-based system that does these like quick or fast exits on a Plasma-based system.
Yeah, I don't think that's terribly hard to implement. I think the harder part is getting the Plasma part first, and then that extra feature.
I have pulled up here the interface for actually moving assets from mainnet to Matic network, and same for XDAI, OmniBridge as well, just for visual reference as to like what's the user experience right now to actually move from L1 to L2. Yeah.
And I think like from the UI, it may look the same from a UI UX flow perspective, but I think mechanically how it works is quite different. There's these different trust assumptions, and when it comes to like layer 1 or ETH mainnet to like XDAI, I know they're moving XDAI from like a proof of authority to more of a proof of stake with their token called Stake. I believe it's called Stake. And right now, with I think they're calling it the arbitrary message bridge. That is essentially, I think Nathan alluded to it, a multi-sig that controls this bridging back and forth. Whereas when you look at the Plasma implementation, they have the Plasma operator, and they're just doing a state sync, and then on the way. So they're state syncing on into Plasma, and then they're checkpointing back out, as Nathan was referring to in terms of that Merkle root, back onto the main chain.
And to comment on security, the Plasma bridging is more decentralized and more secure in general. To what degree it would take more time to explain, but XDAI uses a trusted mechanism. You always need some trust mechanism to move state between a side chain and a main chain, or between any two main chains. Between any two blockchains, you'll need some sort of trust mechanism to move state between the two, unless you're using something like an atomic swap with a hash time lock. That could be a trustless way, but your options are pretty limited. You have to have kind of the same inner mechanisms on each chain. You have to have the same hash functions or the ability to access them and things like this. But that's, again, a very limited type of state channel transaction. But the security of moving state between XDAI, moving your tokens between Ethereum and XDAI, and the security of moving your tokens through the Matic Plasma chain. In general, it's much less trustless in the Matic case where you're doing Plasma. And that was kind of one of the main motivating factors of using something like Plasma is there is a better security guarantee there. So Matic should be doing something in the case of you deposit to a contract and their operator will get an event for that deposit and you'll be included into the layer 2 chain. If not included into the layer 2 chain, you should have a fraud proof that will allow you to exit your deposit back. So in the worst case, you might lose a week's worth of time with your capital in the Plasma for Matic bridging. In the worst case for XDAI, XDAI will steal your funds, or more specifically, the bridge between Ethereum and XDAI would steal your funds, which would be the Omni bridge. And they use like a validator, small bit of trustless system, I think. I'm not sure of the current state of the Omni bridge. Of course, they want to move towards proof of stake bridging. And you have systems like Cosmos and Polkadot. These are chains to be connecting pieces for other chains where you kind of have that consensus algorithm to handle that trusted piece that you need to move state between blockchains.
Cool. That was a great summary or synopsis there. So yeah, they may look the same, the UIs, but underneath, in terms of the mechanism design and the amount of trust can vary, even though they may, from a UI UX perspective, feel similar. Yeah, I think when it comes to layer 2, I don't know if there's what direction we want to take the conversation here. We are kind of high level when it comes to the different options. Is there anything that we're missing when in general talking about layer 2?
Yeah, well, actually, I think we could touch a little bit on layer 1, Ethereum, and what are its merits as a blockchain and why there's so much momentum around Ethereum being the asset layer for all of crypto, and your thoughts on whether that will hold, whether it's a network effect, is that a monopoly? Because there's a lot of chatter around, is Ethereum the most defensible layer 1, etc.
I see. So this conversation is not so much about the layer 2 right now, but moving more into kind of the dynamics of layer 1, and it really has to do, I think, with the ecosystem and the marketplace. You just have accrued work during the bear market, 2018, 2019, 2020, that people are building, and when you look at where the market was in the bull run before, let's say during this the 2017, you didn't have the Uniswaps, the compounds, the makers, or the DAI, and there wasn't a lot there. I think it took the bear market and people continuing to be heads down and building, where you have this kind of network effect of composability that I think really gave rise to the DeFi summer, and kind of unlocked all of that. And those pieces, DeFi primitives, if you want to call them that, need to be built, and it just takes time on potentially other chains. whether or not they're easy to do in an EVM-based chain like BSC. Who knows? I think that there, when it comes to the amount of assets and liquidity, it's in ETH right now. But does that mean that will continue? That's like the $1 trillion question. And are there potential, like, I don't know, vampire attacks, if you will, across chains? Because on BSC you can just easily deploy, and you just change the chain ID, and you get into more philosophical, I think, issues when it comes to the values of it. I've heard the comparison where, I guess, Ethereum, if it's the internet, BSC is like AOL. So cheap fees, easy to get into, things like that. Will it have lasting effect? Yeah, who knows? Will people really know the difference between, like, did people early days of AOL know the difference between the internet and what AOL presented as the internet? Are we experiencing eternal September right now, or is this just cyclical, bull bear? Who knows? I think that's why a lot of chatter is happening right now on crypto Twitter and in Clubhouse and things like that, because people are trying to figure that out at the moment. And I think this is part of this conversation too, when it comes to layer one and Ethereum, and kind of where are things going, because we're experiencing this prolonged, kind of, we saw this before with crypto kitties, but it's unrelenting, because you have blocks being filled up on Ethereum, so gas units increase, but also you have this double whammy where Ethereum is getting all-time high, so relative to the price of the US dollar, it's just gas transactions are just going through the roof. And depending on where you're coming from and what your context and motivation is doing a transaction, it might be great, but others, when you talk about people getting into the market now, that are just entering the ecosystem, do they really care about the values of decentralization, permissionlessness, or being censorship resistant? I don't know. So this is kind of, as we churn through a next generation of users using crypto in general, cryptocurrencies, we'll see where the market goes. So I think it's a big question mark. And I guess to answer your question, I'm not sure. It's like a question of where the market will be, and I think everyone's trying to figure that out now. And it really depends on your perspective of where you're coming from. It's one of those things too where it's in like tech, like everyone knows they should back up, but no one really does until a catastrophic hard drive failure. Then like, oh shit, like I should have backed up. When it comes to data privacy, they're like, I don't really care until there's a breach, until you feel the pain of it. And is decentralization, is that of the same category? So everyone's not going to really care until funds get seized, you can't move your assets out, is going to be kind of the question mark. Will that happen? And it probably is not a if, but like a when. So when that does happen, is it going to is it going to make a difference or not? Or, are these systems going to be too big to fail at that point? So, I think that's kind of, we have to wait and see how, everything kind of shapes up.
So you kind of touched on a lot of points there.
Yeah.
So the main question here is, why Ethereum, and maybe even why Ethereum now? I'll agree that, yeah, having markets on your side when you're developing inside of Ethereum is nice. You get more funding to work on projects, things like that. But it can be distracting. It's not really important. Ethereum development, came from Bitcoin, right? So it's one of, if not the first innovation on top of the Bitcoin network. And the Bitcoin network was experimenting with things like colored coins, how to, or scripts. They had pay to script hashes, these sorts of new types of opcode executions inside of Bitcoin transactions. And Bitcoin came up with this fundamental idea that it would not allow executions to go over a certain number, right? Because you can't just infinitely let nodes execute or force nodes to infinitely execute code. It would block the network. So Bitcoin just put a hard stop and said, we're only going to allow very small amounts of execution. And Ethereum took that and said, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to expand that. We're going to open that up. Of course, there has to be a finite limit. We can't just allow that number to go on forever. But you can play with that number at least. That number can be acceptable, perhaps, for given hardware at the time. And so, you create this idea for gas, and Ethereum now becomes a mention in the Wikipedia of Alan Turing's halting problem, which is a famous problem in computer science where you can't determine if a loop will ever stop, right? You won't ever know if a program will terminate. And so how do you run that on a blockchain and expect the economics of that to be acceptable? So Ethereum is listed as a solution to the halting problem in the wiki because it puts a limit on the computation and a financial burden and a limit to that. So this idea was novel, right? To expand this a limit of computation in an economic way where prices and what you're willing to pay for that computation in the marketplace, these are novel ideas. And this spawned Ethereum. Why would you want to use Ethereum? You would use Ethereum for security, right? You kind of touched on this, James, with do people need this, right? If you're choosing something like Ethereum, you're choosing a bulletproof vest, and not everything needs a bulletproof vest. Your software may not be in an ecosystem where you're taking a lot of bullets. But you choose Ethereum because you do need that. You need that protection. You need the security because you're dealing with money. And generally, you're dealing with a lot of money. And there will be people trying to take shots at that kind of code. If your code has a lot of money and you want to do this in a trustless way, then you have to be ready for the environment. The environment is now attacking your system. So you use Ethereum because it's bulletproof against that environment. You will use a centralized system if you didn't care about trust. It would be much easier to implement, and it would have the same, if not better, safety properties. And that is why you would use Ethereum. You use Ethereum because you don't trust the operator of your exchange. You're tired of Mt. Gox's losing your money. You're tired of Robinhood's shutting down the purchases of a trading pair because it's favorable for hedge funds. You're tired of long withdrawal times based off of the whims of Coinbase's reserves or their lawyers or however the market is reacting at a certain time. So these kinds of little, but not so little, actually quite core infrastructural important parts of finance are why you choose Ethereum. And there's other options, right? There's other chains. Do those other chains do anything to increase security? No, they do not. No other blockchain has improved security beyond Ethereum.
That's a good point. So it's like it's a progression or kind of a gradient, if you will. And at the end, it seems like the logical conclusion is Ethereum.
It's simple, right? It's Ethereum is Bitcoin, but it can do something more than Bitcoin, and it's as secure. You can't say that
Yep.
about anything else. Maybe Zcash, the first one to use a snark to shield the transactions, the first one to be private, you could say. But yeah, other than that, it's really the only innovation we've had in the blockchain space. There really hasn't been any innovations in the past decade.
Yeah, and so if in terms of a logical conclusion, that seems very reasonable. Like the road ends in Ethereum, whether you start on some finance chain or some enterprise chain. As you continue your journey, if you do, you end up most likely in a world that looks like Ethereum. But do all people like finish that path, or go through all of the steps? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe some people are kind of satisfied, with some trade-offs because they're busy with other things in life other than trading crypto. Yeah, I think it kind of depends. Some people know that data privacy is important, and they're willing to risk that compromise for whatever reason, and still put up baby pics and happy birthday messages on Facebook. So it's kind of
as I said, I see these things as kind of core pillars of a financial institution. So if you want to say, should you care about this? I would say, why wouldn't you? I think you'd be remiss if you didn't care about security and decentralization or trust if you're dealing with finance.
Totally agree. I agree. I wonder if, or how long will it take for the quote unquote masses to also come to this realization. And I think that is kind of the context in which I think about, long term, but then like what's the next step here when it comes to, we are dealing in February 2021, gas prices are really high, ETH is at all-time high, and transactions cost a lot. What's the next move here now, versus kind of like, the ultimate kind of inevitability or the ultimate time horizon?
Well, I mean, Ethereum has its plans, right? Ethereum 2.0, Ethereum's work with proof of stake is groundbreaking. I think maybe Cardano is another scientific institute that has done some proof of stake work, but the amount of, I know, just at least time and effort that has gone into research into proof of stake from Ethereum side is spanning 5 to 6 years now. And, they, I think, have put together the most reasonable trade-offs for proof of stake. It won't be as bulletproof as Bitcoin. But, the only thing is, like, do you care about the caveman scenario? You can Google the caveman scenario, perhaps with proof of stake arguments, if anybody wants to go down that rabbit hole. But proof of stake answers Bitcoin and says, well, we don't care about security as much as you in this doomsday apocalyptic scenario. And that's probably reasonable, right? And so here we sit with Ethereum, where it's not scaling well. Its security properties are making it slow. And whenever it gets popular, it chokes. We've seen this a few times. And so you have, Ethereum 2.0 to help push that. And I think with sharding and proof of stake, you're going to see this become relaxed and much more usable. This won't happen anytime soon. This is going to take years still, because Ethereum does do things very slow. But they don't do anything that would compromise security, and that's why it's so slow. So it takes time to get these things right, if they can even be done correctly. So you want to do something now, then you might make a few more trade-offs, and you might use a layer 2 system. If you use a layer 2 system, then you're going to make a few more trade-offs with security. and that will give you usability right now. And it's kind of that same decision that Ethereum made when they said, well, we need proof of stake, it has to be usable. So we're going to say that the doomsday situation isn't something that humans really care about. And this is a human system. So we'll leave that. And maybe applications are making similar kinds of decisions when they look at trade-offs when needing usability.
That's right. That's right. That's a good way to put it. So it really is the context of the application and, what you care about ultimately for if you're creating an app, your users, or as a user, kind of your context. So it may not be like a one size fits all when we're in this congested or clogged network scenario right now. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other prompts or questions to help guide the conversation. We can go down a lot of different rabbit holes here. I want to make sure that this is pertinent to the audience that's listening.
Yeah, maybe we could just go through our experience quickly, just so that we get, a personal view of what it's like to have an application that you want to run reasonably well and right now. Yeah. So yeah, we looked at, I think, we've looked at every option, right? We've looked at zero knowledge. I think to me, the ideal scaling solution as far as security goes are these zero knowledge scaling solutions. These things are as bulletproof as a Bitcoin network. So that's why they're secure. And their only downside is a little bit slower transaction throughput, but I think still more than any application really needs right now. So those look good. However, they're still very new. They take time. They take a team of very skilled engineers to create. You need a mathematician or two to kind of verify that your snark proof is correct for whatever your system is doing. So these things are complicated to make, but those are, I think, the most promising. So that's not necessarily going to work for us, right now. If we want to alleviate this gas pressure, we can't necessarily build that right now. And so you might look at something like Plasma, which we've looked at with Matic Network. These things have had a little bit more time to bake. They're a little bit more readily available. They're a little bit easier to integrate with right now. They just kind of run the EVM. You don't have to deal with building your own system off chain. But the wait time for the exit, right? Usability is, I think, the most top concern at all times whenever we're doing anything with this application. And one of the things you're going to have to do is move tokens between the heavy clogged place and the nice fast place, and we want to make that as easy as possible. And XDAI really offers that right now. It's maybe the least secure option. However, it still fits the parameters of our need. The security there are still security properties there. To say that it's the least secure isn't to say that it's not secure. There are still things that they've done. And for now, I think it fits well, and it makes it to where you can actually use it and understand how this will feel in the future. You can just move your token to a contract on the layer 1 chain, and then their bridging mechanism will pick that up, and then you just have a token on the layer 2 chain. And then if you want to go back, which is the key difference between XDAI and Plasma, it's the same process, and it's almost the same process, but there's no wait time, and it's fairly atomic. And if for some reason the trust system of the bridging fails, you still have your state on the XDAI, and you're always at the XDAI proof of stake network's trust. So you do have a proof of stake network there with people that can be burned for doing the incorrect thing. It's not as secure as Ethereum's proof of stake, but it's, again, probably secure enough for our use cases. And these things are readily available. They've had time to bake, and they have tooling that we can use. And, they make sense for right now.
To add to your point, I think XDAI is probably has the most volume currently in terms of other decentralized exchanges that are launched on layer 2. Just between HoneySwap and DMEX and some of these newer ones, there's the equivalent of billions of dollars being traded there without any security issues so far.
There's also Avalanche. They have a AMM, and then Binance Smart Chain, if you consider PancakeSwap, is also another Uniswap clone on their EVM compatible chain. I think those might be the two biggest volume dexes outside of Uniswap. I could be wrong. Then Loopring as well. So there's a lot of layer 2 or other EVM sidechain DEX offerings getting traction right now.
Yeah. And they all use all those different systems that we've talked about today. And that's really interesting. And I'm really excited to see this stuff build out even more.
Yeah, it's
and I'm
interesting
excited
too.
to explore them further too, even with this application. You know, it doesn't have to stay on XDAI.
That's right. That's right. You know, kind of my perspective when it comes to XDAI is it feels like, and this is just my perspective, where kind of like a lot of the action is right now. I'm hearing more rumblings and more dev teams and projects moving toward BSC. And that seems to be gaining steam, but XDAI is where a lot of, you know, at least from where I sit in terms of the Ethereum ecosystem, the chain that people are going to. And so it has the most dry powder when it comes to composability and other things that are being built on it. That doesn't mean that will always be the case. So there's always this optionality of going to other EVM-based sidechains, because that's a great thing about you know, these implementations. It's, you know, besides the bridging and whatnot, which may be bespoke, the actual contracts can be, since they're all EVM based, be deployed on these different systems. But I see XDAI as being where a lot of kind of the developer ecosystem in Ethereum is starting at, just because it was there. You know, I remember using XDAI, I think it was 2019 at East Denver, when Austin Griffith, you know, was doing the whole food truck experiment. And that used XDAI. And that was like the first, like, oh, I can use crypto kind of in the real world kind of thing, in a kind of it was a ETH based dev conference, but still it was like, oh, okay, you know, it can handle it. And so it just had the most time to bake. But, you know, with gas prices now, and I think this is why the market is a little different than in 2017. You know, with CryptoKitties, things were like, there were other options, but now we're seeing them, and I do see kind of more momentum, if you will, keeping an eye on it when it comes to BSC. But like, there are different trade-offs there. But again, it goes back to the previous thread of, do people really care or not? And so, you know, you can get into the philosophical debate. So it's really just trying to, you know, keep an eye on the market and see where it's going. And then, as Andrew was mentioning, there's these different L2 dexes that are also emerging too. So there's a lot more options than there were, you know, 4 years ago. But, you know, I think the market is still maturing, and we're trying to figure out like where things are going in the next, I guess, like year or two. And it's kind of, at least for me, kind of a bit unknown. So it's just keeping a watchful eye. You know, it's keeping heads down in development, but then also, like, you know, trying to keep track of what's happening on like crypto Twitter and Clubhouse and whatnot, kind of at the same time. So it's trying to balance the two things here so that we don't miss the mark.
For sure. For sure. And yeah, I think that because of the product market fit we've seen in DeFi, everyone's using AMMs and collateralized lending apps and NFTs now. There's a ton of demand for using Ethereum's block space, and the transaction costs have gone to the moon. But with that demand has inspired and incentivized a lot of teams to provide scaling solutions. So, you know, the incentives are clearly there for infrastructure to be built and for teams to build the right scaling solutions. And it's definitely going to be kind of like a gold rush for whoever, you know, whoever gets the most, grabs the most land during this time of infrastructure expansion for blockchain applications. I think one thing that's unique and it's relevant to the subject of scaling and scaling solutions is the adoption of MetaMask in general. I think that because Consensus has done such a good job building out MetaMask over the years, and it's gotten really widespread adoption, and there's continuous product improvements at an acceptable speed, and everyone knows how to use it. I think that there is a significant amount of defensibility around Ethereum assets, as well as EVM compatible scaling solutions, so they're compatible with MetaMask. Yeah, what are your thoughts on, you know, a MetaMask in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think as a brand, MetaMask is within the crypto community like trusted. You know, it's this kind of double-edged sword where it's easy to use. You know, when it comes to kind of like quote unquote vendor lock-in, being able to sign in with like your wallet address and everyone is compatible with like MetaMask or Wallet Connect. I think that, you know, it's great for identity portability, you know, for things that you want to hold in MetaMask. You know, not getting into a conversation when it comes to like, you know, hot wallets versus cold storage. But it's great. I think that also they, you know, need to, they move really slow and intentionally because security is of utmost kind of priority. That's their main feature set, is that security or the brand safety there. Is it going to be the ultimate solution? You know, I don't know. I think it comes down to use case. Again, it's like, you know, when you look at what's happening, and you alluded to this, Andrew, when it comes to like NFTs, you have these new people that are coming into the ecosystem. Are they going to necessarily care about like, you know, holding, you know, to them what might not be a significant amount of value? You know, so if you talk about NFTs or like the social token space, you know, these are like low value, or, you know, some like talking about mainstream kind of adoption here, not talking about like the Beeple drops and whatnot when it comes to NFTs, or you know, these non-fungible peeps, or, you know, what's more kind of high art, but talking about just, you know, mainstream. Is a burner wallet kind of scenario going to be okay for them, where they just OAuth in and use something like Taurus potentially? So I think it depends on the use case. You know, would a trader or, you know, someone aping into the next DeFi thing going to be comfortable with Taurus? I don't think so. I think in that category, that class of consumer persona, I think it will be, you know, some type of MetaMask, or, you know, ledger connected MetaMask or something, or Wallet Connect kind of situation. So I think it will depend. I don't know if you can draw analogies back to what has occurred before, and say that like, are we kind of in the Netscape era, and is MetaMask that software interface to deal with crypto, just like Netscape was to deal with, you know, web content? I'm not sure. It might like have these different, you know, kind of categories, whether, you know, it's not like you need a more secure browser or a less secure browser. All the browsers, and the reason why e-commerce took off was because of SSL, which was introduced, I think, by Netscape actually. But you know, in crypto, there might be like high value assets, medium, and low, or whatever the categorization is. And I think that's going to determine the wallet interface, you know, and whether or not MetaMask, hardware wallet, or a burner wallet will be kind of the norm. I think there might be different strata there. But I think for the majority of kind of like what we're dealing with in terms of the customer base, the potential customers, for DAOfi, I do think MetaMask is the kind of the norm, or the standard there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any commentary on Rollups as a scaling solution?
You say Rollups?
Yeah.
Well, so Rollups they come in two different flavors. The word rollup just kind of means that you can revert the state back to a known good checkpoint if the operator goes AWOL, which is a big property of Plasma. This is the security problem with Plasma. It kind of has an issue of what it does when the operator goes AWOL. There's always been some sort of edge case problem that can always hack the user to lose funds with Plasma. So Rollup attempts to achieve a way to solve this by checkpointing and moving back. But Rollup is a pretty inconsequential word. That's kind of been the interesting part of this whole layer 2 thing, is understanding the vocabulary, building the vocabulary. There's been a lot of, if you look at the ETH research channels of communication between the people that are actually building this stuff, there's a lot of communication about the terminology around this and what does the terminology actually mean. So there's two different types of rollups. You have optimistic rollups and you have zero knowledge rollups. So optimistic rollups are going to be more like Plasma. And those are going to have the same kind of problem as Plasma, where you have to deal with fraud proofs and the issues that fraud proofs can bring. However, optimistic rollups put the data on chain, and this alleviates a huge problem with Plasma. And then you have the zero knowledge rollups, and this is more of what something like Loopring is doing, where they put the data on chain and then they use a zero knowledge proof to make sure that that data was it was arrived to by a correct state transition. So I think that that approach is the state of the art approach. That approach is the most sophisticated, and it gives you the best of the trade-off worlds in general, if you're talking about security, which we should be, as always. So that I think the ZK rollup approach is a really nice approach. It's an approach that requires a good amount of skill to use. It's not something that's very easy to build.
For sure, yeah. Cool. I think we touched base on most areas of discussion regarding layer 1, layer 2, and all the different options. Anything else like that we haven't addressed or want to comment on? If not, I think that should wrap up the discussion. For anyone that's listening this far, these are some of the topics that we discuss internally, and we assess the pros and cons of our roadmap internally to make the best decision moving forward for the end user. And just wanted to provide transparency for those curious in the process and those eager to learn more or gather other perspectives. So thanks all for your time, and appreciate sharing your insights.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.